Alcatraz, the prison no one could escape. They were told no one could truly disappear inside the American prison system. Yet some men vanished into isolation units so sealed off that even their names stopped circulating. Families waited for letters that never came. Attorneys filed motions that stalled in silence. Outside the walls, rumors spread faster than verified facts. In New York and California, two facilities became symbols of confinement so absolute that escape was not the only thing considered impossible. Rikers Island sits on a narrow strip of land in New York City's East River, a jail complex that has held tens of thousands of people awaiting trial or serving short sentences. Across the country, San Quentin Rehabilitation Center stands along the shoreline north of San Francisco, California's oldest prison, long associated with death row and some of the state's most serious offenses. Both facilities developed reputations that stretched far beyond their physical walls, shaping public perception about what confinement in America truly looks like. Rikers Island primarily houses people who have not yet been convicted, many detained because they cannot afford bail, a reality that has drawn sustained national scrutiny. San Quentin, by contrast, has historically confined individuals serving long sentences, including life terms, making it a destination rather than a temporary holding point. Over time, each institution became a measure of how far the system can isolate a human being while still operating within legal boundaries. At Rikers, daily life has often been defined by overcrowding, staffing shortages, and frequent lockdowns that limit movement for hours or sometimes entire days. At San Quentin, routine is rigid but structured, shaped by count times, work assignments, educational programs, and the constant presence of perimeter security. Yet structure alone does not determine experience. What happens between official procedures often shapes a person's survival far more than policy manuals suggest. Rikers has faced repeated federal investigations into violence, use of force, and conditions inside housing units, leading to court-appointed oversight in recent years. San Quentin has also undergone scrutiny, particularly during public health crises and debates surrounding the administration of the death penalty. If stories like this matter to you, subscribing helps us continue examining how these institutions actually function beyond headlines. Inside Rikers, movement begins with count, when officers verify every person in custody is present before doors open for meals or limited recreation. But counts are more than routine. When staffing is thin, missed counts can trigger extended lockdowns, confining hundreds of people to their cells without clear timelines. Those lockdowns have sometimes lasted far longer than intended, intensifying frustration and increasing tension across entire housing units. At San Quentin, count procedures follow strict schedules as well, reinforced by layered security including gun towers and controlled access corridors. Unlike Rikers, San Quentin's long-term population often creates stable social groupings that persist for years rather than weeks or months. That stability can reduce sudden turnover, but it also means conflicts, once formed, can linger and deepen over extended periods. Rikers' transient population creates a different pressure, where individuals cycle in and out rapidly, disrupting any sense of routine community. Attorneys and advocacy groups have documented extended periods where detainees reported limited access to legal calls or court appearances due to operational breakdowns. What followed surprised even seasoned observers when court backlogs combined with internal disruptions, leaving some individuals in custody longer than originally anticipated. At San Quentin, access to programming has historically included education, job training, and media initiatives run under supervision, reflecting California's shifting emphasis toward rehabilitation. But rehabilitation inside a maximum security setting operates alongside strict security classifications that separate individuals based on risk assessments. Those classifications determine housing, work eligibility, and movement privileges, shaping daily life in ways rarely visible to the public. Rikers has relied heavily on punitive segregation in the past, though reforms have aimed to reduce its use, especially for younger detainees. Even with reforms, oversight reports have continued to document violence among detainees and between staff and those in custody. Few people outside the system realize how much staffing levels influence safety, oversight, and the basic rhythm of daily confinement. At San Quentin, the presence of death row historically created an additional layer of isolation. separating condemned inmates from the general population. Though policies have evolved, the legacy of that separation continues to shape the institution's identity and public perception. And beneath the official statistics and policy debates, one question quietly persists. How does a person endure years inside walls built to prevent even the possibility of escape? Endurance inside Rikers Island often begins with uncertainty, because many detainees do not know how long they will remain before their cases move forward. Court delays, administrative backlogs, and attorney scheduling conflicts can stretch pretrial detention far beyond initial expectations, intensifying pressure inside already strained housing units. For individuals who cannot afford bail, the difference between release and continued confinement may hinge entirely on financial resources rather than final verdicts. That reality has fueled legal challenges and legislative reforms in New York, reshaping bail laws and altering who remains held at Rikers. But reforms alone did not immediately stabilize daily conditions, especially when staffing shortages limited supervision and program access. In multiple oversight reports, monitors documented instances where detainees were confined to their cells for extended periods due to lack of available officers. Limited out-of-cell time affects access to showers, phone calls, recreation, and legal preparation, creating ripple effects beyond physical confinement. What followed surprised even some city officials when federal courts warned that deteriorating conditions could warrant outside intervention. Meanwhile, on the West Coast, San Quentin's structure reflected a different model shaped by long-term incarceration rather than rapid turnover. Individuals assigned to San Quentin often arrive after classification evaluations determine appropriate security placement within California's prison system. Those assessments consider criminal history, behavior, and institutional risk, influencing housing assignments and eligibility for work or education. Inside San Quentin, some incarcerated individuals have participated in accredited college courses offered through partnerships with outside institutions. Others have worked in prison industries, kitchen operations, maintenance, or media programs operating under supervision and strict guidelines. Yet access to programming is not universal, and waiting lists can delay participation for months or even years. Few people outside ever learned how competitive those program slots can become in a facility defined by long sentences. At Rikers, programming has often been disrupted by operational instability, making consistent participation difficult for many detainees. Frequent lockdowns reduce classroom hours, counseling sessions, and group activities, limiting opportunities for structured engagement. When programming stops, idle time increases, and tension inside housing units can escalate without clear outlets. San Quentin has faced its own crisis points, including public health emergencies that exposed vulnerabilities within congregate living environments. During one widely reported outbreak, the rapid spread of illness prompted investigations into transfer procedures and quarantine protocols. The consequences extended beyond medical concerns, raising questions about administrative decision-making and institutional accountability. At Rikers, oversight bodies have repeatedly examined use-of-force incidents involving both detainees and correctional staff. Body camera footage, internal reviews, and court findings have documented patterns that prompted policy revisions and disciplinary action. But accountability inside a complex facility does not always translate into immediate cultural change. At San Quentin, discussions around the future of death row reshaped how the institution is perceived nationally. California's suspension of executions shifted attention toward rehabilitation efforts and long-term confinement conditions. Still, the presence of individuals serving life sentences ensures that San Quentin remains synonymous with irreversible punishment in public imagination. Across both institutions, family visitation policies shape how connections to the outside world are maintained or strained. Changes to visitation procedures, including virtual options and security restrictions, have altered how incarcerated people communicate with loved ones. But that connection to the outside can also be fragile, dependent on operational stability, technology access, and policy consistency. And when those connections weaken, the psychological weight of confinement can grow in ways statistics rarely capture. Psychological strain inside confinement rarely appears in official press releases, yet it shapes daily survival as much as walls, bars, and perimeter security. At Rikers Island, advocates and court monitors have repeatedly raised concerns about mental health services struggling to meet the needs of a large detainee population. Many individuals arrive with pre-existing mental health conditions, substance use disorders, or trauma histories that intensify under restrictive housing conditions. When treatment units are understaffed, delays in evaluations and medication management can create cascading consequences across entire housing areas. What followed in several documented cases drew scrutiny from federal judges who questioned whether constitutional standards were being upheld. City officials have proposed closing Rikers Island altogether, replacing it with smaller borough-based facilities intended to reduce scale and improve oversight. Yet closure plans have faced construction delays, budget challenges, and political debate, leaving current conditions under ongoing examination. San Quentin, meanwhile, has undergone its own transformation as California rebranded it the San Quentin Rehabilitation Center. The renaming reflects a policy shift emphasizing education, skill development, and reentry preparation for those who will eventually return to society. New initiatives have expanded vocational programs, peer mentorship, and partnerships with outside organizations focused on rehabilitation outcomes. But San Quentin still houses individuals serving life sentences without parole, raising complex questions about what rehabilitation means in that context. Few people outside consider how programming operates differently for someone with a release date compared to someone without one. In both institutions, correctional officers work within systems shaped by budget constraints, public pressure, and evolving legal mandates. Staffing levels influence safety, response times, and the ability to escort individuals to court, medical appointments, or educational spaces. When staffing shortages intensify, overtime increases, fatigue sets in, and institutional stress can deepen on both sides of the bars. At Rikers, independent monitors have described cycles where violence, staffing attrition, and lockdowns reinforce one another. Breaking that cycle requires sustained policy implementation rather than short-term emergency measures. San Quentin's history reflects a different tension, balancing maximum security infrastructure with public expectations for measurable rehabilitation progress. California's broader sentencing reforms have reduced prison populations statewide, altering who remains inside facilities like San Quentin. Those demographic shifts influence housing dynamics, program demand, and long-term planning for institutional resources. Yet neither prison can fully escape the reputations formed over decades of media coverage and public controversy. For Rikers Island, the name itself often signals crisis, litigation, and debates about pretrial detention in America's largest city. For San Quentin, the image of death row continues to shape perception, even as policies evolve and executions remain suspended. Behind those reputations are thousands of individuals navigating structured routines, legal processes, and personal survival strategies every day. Some will leave within weeks after charges are resolved or sentences completed. Others will spend decades adapting to institutional rhythms that rarely change quickly. The question of whether a prison is impossible to escape may overlook a deeper reality. For many inside Rikers and San Quentin, the greater challenge has never been physical escape. It has been enduring uncertainty, reform debates, and the long wait for change to reach the cell door. If this story kept you watching, the next one will stay with you even longer. Subscribe for more real prison documentaries. Reputation does not change overnight, even when policy does. At Rikers Island, plans to close the complex have moved through city councils, courtrooms, and construction timelines. Yet the jail remains operational today. The proposal to replace Rikers with 4 borough-based facilities was designed to reduce scale and modernize infrastructure. Supporters argue smaller facilities would improve oversight, reduce violence, and allow detainees to remain closer to families and attorneys. But projected closure dates have shifted repeatedly, extending uncertainty for staff, detainees, and surrounding communities. Few people outside government circles realize how complex it is to dismantle a jail system housing thousands at any given time. Construction delays, funding disputes, and logistical planning have slowed the transition process. Meanwhile, federal oversight has continued to monitor conditions, issuing reports that document persistent safety concerns. What followed in several hearings signaled growing impatience from the bench regarding the pace of reform. Court-appointed monitors have emphasized staffing stabilization as a foundational requirement for lasting change. Without sufficient officers and supervisors, even well-designed policies struggle to function consistently. At the same time, recruiting and retaining correctional staff in high-pressure environments has proven difficult nationwide. San Quentin's transformation has unfolded under a different framework, centered on redesign rather than closure. California officials announced plans to remake the facility into a model rehabilitation center inspired by international approaches. The initiative includes expanded educational access, vocational certification, and redesigned housing intended to promote structured interaction. However, implementation requires retrofitting an aging maximum security facility built in the 19th century. Infrastructure constraints limit how quickly physical spaces can be adapted to new correctional philosophies. Few institutions attempt reform while still housing individuals serving some of the longest sentences in the state. San Quentin must balance security protocols with expanded programming, maintaining perimeter integrity while shifting internal culture. That balance demands retraining staff and recalibrating expectations for both officers and incarcerated participants. At Rikers, debate continues over how to reduce reliance on pretrial detention without compromising court attendance rates. Bail reform adjustments have already altered intake numbers, but population fluctuations still create operational strain. When intake rises unexpectedly, housing capacity and staffing ratios tighten immediately. Those fluctuations complicate long-term planning, particularly during active construction toward borough facilities. San Quentin's population trends have also shifted as California reduced overall prison numbers through sentencing reform. Fewer admissions change classification patterns and alter demand for specialized housing units. Yet individuals serving life terms remain a constant presence, shaping institutional identity. Across both coasts, policymakers now confront the same underlying question. Can large, historically punitive institutions truly evolve into safer, more stable environments without starting from the ground up? The answer is still unfolding inside active housing units, administrative offices, and courtrooms. And until structural change fully materializes, daily life continues under systems built decades before reform became a priority.